My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 32 years old, and my own brother publicly announced my bankruptcy at our annual family reunion, completely unaware that I had secretly bought his dream house that very morning. Before I tell you how I turned the tables and exposed his entire empire of lies, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The annual Chen family reunion was less a celebration of kinship and more a pageant of my brother's success, held at my parents' house, which itself was a monument to appearances. It was a sprawling colonial, perfect from the outside, but inside, it felt like a museum of suburban achievement. The furniture was expensive but stiff, the rugs were priceless but covered in plastic runners, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the chime of a grandfather clock that no one ever looked at. It was a house for showing, not for living, and every year, my arrival was the unofficial start to the performance. I guided my 10-year-old Honda sedan up their pristine, winding driveway. The car was paid for, reliable, and invisible to most of the world, which is exactly how I liked it. But here it was a statement of failure. I parked it at the far end, a humble brown Beetle amidst a swarm of gleaming black and silver luxury beasts. The Autos, the BMWs, the obligatory Teslas of my various cousins and their spouses. As I got out, the front door opened, and there he was. My older brother, Alex, leaning against a white column, holding a sweating glass of what was probably single malt scotch. He wore a linen shirt that was artfully unbuttoned just enough to show off his tan, and a watch on his wrist that cost more than my car. Well, he drawled, his voice carrying across the manicured lawn. Look what the cat dragged in. I was about to send out a search party. Thought maybe the old girl finally gave up the ghost on the highway. I managed a tight smile, grabbing the decent bottle of Cabernet I'd brought from the passenger seat. She runs fine, Alex. Never misses a beat. That's the problem, little brother, he said, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that was meant to feel brotherly, but was really just a subtle assertion of dominance. You never miss a beat. Same beat, day in, day out. You gotta learn to live a little. My mother, Linda, bustled out, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal warmth. Marcus, you made it. We were getting so worried. She hugged me, a quick, papery embrace, her eyes already scanning past me to her favored son. Alex was just telling everyone about his new property development. It's simply marvelous. From the doorway, my father, Dr. Richard Chen, the retired surgeon who saw the world in terms of prestige and pedigree, called out, Alex, come show your uncle the plans for the new deck. He didn't so much as glance in my direction. My arrival was complete. I had served my purpose as the drab backdrop against which my brother's brilliance could truly shine. The afternoon wore on in a predictable haze of polite chatter and barely concealed competition. I circulated, making small talk, answering the usual questions with practiced patience. Yes, I'm still a nurse. Yes, at the same hospital. No, not a doctor, a nurse. Yes, the hours are long. Each conversation was a tiny pinprick, a reminder of my station in the family's rigid hierarchy. The main event, as always, came after the meal. We were all arranged in the formal living room, nursing coffee and dessert. Alex, who had been getting progressively louder as he refilled his scotch, stood and clinked a spoon against his glass. The room fell silent in anticipation. If I could have everyone's attention, he began, beaming as if he were about to announce a cure for a major disease. I wanted to share something, partly as a celebration, and partly as a cautionary tale. His eyes found mine across the room. Oh, here it comes. I was in Marcus's neighborhood the other day, he lied smoothly, just dropping off some of Mom's famous lemon bars, and I noticed his mailbox was just overflowing. I was worried, so I just tidied it up a bit for him. He paused, letting the feigned concern sink in, and I couldn't help but see some of the letters. Looked pretty serious. One from Capital One, another from a medical collections agency. A few others. He shook his head, his face a mask of sorrow. Little brother, I just want you to know, there's no shame in it. If you're drowning in debt, you can come to us. We're family. We'll help you figure it out. The air turned to ice. It was a masterstroke of passive aggression, painting me as both financially incompetent and irresponsible, all under the guise of brotherly love. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. My cousin Lily gave me a sad little head tilt. My Uncle James suddenly became engrossed in cleaning his glasses. I looked at my grandmother, Nai. She was the only one who met my gaze. Her eyes were dark and fierce. She saw right through the performance. From across the room, she gave a single, sharp nod, as if to say, "Endure. Your time will come." Alex, sensing he had the audience in the palm of his hand, moved on to his grand finale. "But on a happier note," he boomed, "I finally closed the deal on my dream project. A legacy property. A 6-bedroom stunner in the Hamptons, private beach, infinity pool. The works." He went on, describing every luxurious detail. He finished by raising his glass. "It's a reminder that with hard work and ambition, anything is possible." He locked eyes with me. "Of course, it requires a certain level of financial discipline. Not everyone has it." My pocket vibrated. A soft buzz against my leg. I didn't have to look. The timing was perfect. I pushed myself to my feet. The scrape of my chair legs on the hardwood floor sounded unnaturally loud. "If you'll all excuse me," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the triumphant thunder roaring in my chest. "I have to take a call." I walked out onto the stone porch, the cool evening air a welcome relief. The muffled sound of Alex accepting congratulations faded behind me. I pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the twilight. A new message from Wei. Just 2 words. "It's time." A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But they're wrong. It's best served on a foundation of meticulously planned, long-term financial strategy. I typed back my reply. "I'm ready." The plan that was about to detonate my family's carefully constructed reality wasn't a spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a 4-year siege, born from the ashes of a single, humiliating Christmas dinner. 4 years ago, I was sitting at that same polished mahogany dining table, which was groaning under the weight of a turkey and a dozen side dishes. I was 28, exhausted, and running on caffeine and the lingering adrenaline from a brutal holiday shift at the hospital. We had worked for 9 hours straight to save a man who'd had a heart attack while shoveling snow. We'd succeeded. I came to my parents' house feeling a quiet sense of pride, a feeling that was systematically dismantled over the next hour. Alex, of course, was holding court. He'd just flipped a condo in the city and was regaling the family with tales of his negotiating prowess, exaggerating his profit margin with every retelling. My mother, in a well-intentioned but ultimately disastrous attempt to include me, said, "Marcus is doing such important work at the hospital, saving lives. He's a truly wonderful nurse." Alex let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound designed to cut. "Oh, absolutely," he said, swirling a glass of red wine. "Nursing is a noble profession. A great backup career for people who couldn't quite make the cut for medical school." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I felt my face flush. I looked to my father for support, for any sign of defense. Dr. Richard Chen, the man who had spent his life in medicine, who knew the value of a skilled nurse better than anyone, simply took a sip of his water. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting glance, I saw it all. Not malice, but a quiet, damning agreement. In his mind, Alex was right. I was second best. That was the moment the foundation cracked. The moment I realized that, in their eyes, I would never be enough. My hard work, my dedication, my very real, life-saving skills. None of it mattered. I was defined not by what I was, but by what I wasn't. I wasn't Alex. I made my excuses early that night. As I was walking down the cold driveway to my car, a voice called out my name. It was Brian, Alex's husband. He had always been a peripheral figure in my life, quiet and impeccably dressed, the silent partner to Alex's loud charisma. "Hey, Marcus, wait up," he said, jogging to catch up. He wasn't wearing his usual polite social smile. His face looked tired, and there was a flicker of something I hadn't seen before in his eyes. Empathy. "Don't let him get to you," Brian said quietly, shoving his hands in his pockets. "He's all noise, a big, shiny drum. The louder he beats it, the emptier it is inside." I shrugged, trying to seem unaffected. "It's fine. I'm used to it." "No, you're not," he said, his voice firm but kind. "And you shouldn't be. My husband," he sighed, a sound heavy with years of frustration. "He plays checkers. He makes a big show of every move, knocking over the other pieces so everyone will look at him. You, Marcus, you're different. You're quiet. You watch. You think. The problem is, you're letting him set the board." He stopped and looked me straight in the eye. The Christmas lights from the house cast a halo around him. "Stop letting them define the game. It's time you learned to play chess." I was stunned. It was the first time anyone in that family, besides Nai, had ever truly seen me. "How?" The word came out as a raw whisper. "He brags about his wins," Brian explained. "He never talks about his strategy because he doesn't have one. He chases trends. He buys high because it's popular, hoping to sell higher. It's gambling with a good suit. The real money, the real power isn't in flash. It's in value. It's in finding what's solid, what's overlooked, what's broken, and having the patience to fix it. It's about playing the long game." He pulled out his phone. "Give me your number." I did. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a link to an article about value investing. "Read this," the text said, "and read the book it mentions. Then we'll talk." That was the beginning of my secret apprenticeship. Once a month we'd meet. Never anywhere obvious. A small independent coffee shop across town. A bench in a quiet park. He became my mentor, my financial sensei. He didn't give me tips. He gave me an education. He assigned me reading The Intelligent Investor, A Random Walk Down Wall Street. We'd discuss chapters. He'd grill me. "What's APE ratio? Explain the concept of margin of safety. Why is emotional discipline the most important trait for an investor? Alex builds houses of cards on foundations of sand." He told me one afternoon, "You are going to build a fortress of granite, brick by boring brick." And so I did. My life became a double life. By day I was Marcus Chun, trauma nurse. I poured myself into my work, the controlled chaos of the ER a welcome escape. I took every overtime shift I could, hoarding my money with a singular focus. My colleagues would talk about their weekend trips to the beach or their new cars. I would nod and smile, while mentally calculating how much their fun would have cost in VTSAX shares. I remember one Saturday, I spent my entire day off driving my beat-up Honda to a dozen different dealerships. I had saved enough for a down payment on a new, respectable car. Something that wouldn't get me mocked in my parents' driveway. I test drove a solid, sensible Toyota Camry. It was nice, but as the salesman was drawing up the paperwork, I thought about its depreciation rate. I thought about the monthly payment, the higher insurance. I thought about the fortress of granite. I walked out of the dealership, got back in my old Honda, and on Monday morning, I invested the entire down payment into a real estate investment trust Brian had told me to study. 6 months later, that investment was up 12%. The Camry would have been down 10. By night, I was Marcus Chun, secret student of finance. I built spreadsheets. I tracked markets. I learned to read corporate balance sheets and SEC filings. My apartment was small, my furniture was secondhand, and my meals were often instant ramen, but my financial knowledge was growing exponentially. After 2 years of saving and investing in the market, Brian gave me my next assignment. "It's time for real estate," he said. "Not the flashy stuff Alex chases. I want you to find the ugliest house in the best possible neighborhood. Something overlooked with good bones." I spent 6 months looking. I found a small, neglected bungalow in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. The plumbing was a mess, the kitchen was a horror from the 1970s, but it was on a double lot and it was zoned for a duplex. I used a portion of my investment gains for the down payment and got a mortgage. I spent the next year of weekends learning how to hang drywall, lay tile, and fix leaky pipes, watching YouTube tutorials until my eyes burned. It was grueling work, But when I was done, I had a beautiful income-generating property. I rented out both units to tenants who paid on time, and the passive income was another stream to fuel my growing war chest. All the while, the target was crystallizing. The Hamptons house. It was Alex's obsession, his Moby Dick. He talked about it constantly. "It's the ultimate statement," he'd say. "Once I have that house, everyone will know I've truly made it." Through Brian, I learned the real story. The owner, Mr. Abernathy, a retired architect in his late 80s, wasn't a holdout. He was a man who loved the house he had designed and built, and he despised flashy developers like my brother who he knew would tear it down or gut its soul. As fate would have it, Mr. Abernathy's wife was a long-term patient at my hospital's oncology clinic. I didn't know her personally, but I knew her nurses. Brian's advice was simple. "Alex is using leverage. You use humanity." I didn't call Mr. Abernathy's realtor. I found out which day his wife had her weekly treatments. One afternoon, I went to the oncology waiting room with 2 cups of coffee. I found him sitting there, looking tired and frail. I introduced myself. "I'm Marcus Chun. I'm a nurse here. I believe you're a friend of Dr. Martinez." We started talking. Not about real estate, but about the hospital, about his wife's health, about his career as an architect. I visited him a few more times. We talked about his design philosophy, his love for clean lines and natural light. I told him about my own experience renovating my little bungalow, the satisfaction of bringing something back to life with your own hands. Only after a month of these conversations did I broach the subject of his house. I told him I was looking for a quiet place, a refuge from the stress of my job. I told him I admired his work and that my only intention was to preserve it. Alex had been sending him aggressive, lowball offers through his agent. I worked with a lawyer, one Brian vetted, and made a single, fair, all-cash offer, presented with a personal letter detailing my respect for his legacy. I was leveraging the one currency Alex had never managed to accumulate: trust. It took another 6 months to liquidate my assets without raising red flags and funnel the money into an anonymous LLC. The name of the LLC was my own private joke: Boring Brick Fortress LLC. The morning of the family reunion, at 11 a.m., the papers were signed. The wire transfer went through. The fortress was complete. So as I stood there on my parents' porch, phone in hand, I wasn't just a nurse about to embarrass his brother. I was a 4-star general, a grandmaster of chess, and a builder of fortresses, looking down at the smoking crater where my brother's house of cards used to be. And the battle was just beginning. The 3 days between the reunion and the fateful Friday dinner were a strange, surreal limbo. I moved through my life with a secret humming just beneath my skin. At work, I was the same Marcus. I comforted frantic family members. I started IVs on scared patients. I cleaned up messes no one else wanted to touch. But inside, I was a coiled spring. The world outside, however, was already reacting to the tremor I had caused. My phone was a minefield. There was a text from my mother. "I hope you'll be more pleasant on Friday. Your father was very disappointed in your attitude." There was a voicemail from my father, his voice clipped and cold. "Marcus, call me. We need to discuss your behavior." They weren't mad that Alex had humiliated me. They were mad that I hadn't taken it with the appropriate amount of grace. My lack of visible suffering was an inconvenience to them. I ignored it all. Their words, which once had the power to ruin my day, were now just static. Tuesday was the day the universe decided to raise the stakes. The shift started with a bang, a multi-car pileup on the interstate during the morning commute. The ER descended into what we called organized chaos. It was a flood of broken bodies and terrified minds, and my team was in the center of it. For 12 straight hours, I didn't sit down. I barely had time to drink water. "Marcus, Trauma 1 now." Dr. Martinez's voice cut through the noise. He was our director, a man whose calm demeanor was legendary. If he was raising his voice, it was serious. I ran. Inside Trauma 1, a young woman was on the gurney, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Her vitals were crashing on the monitor. Massive internal bleeding, possible ruptured spleen. A resident yelled over the alarms. "We're pushing fluids, but she's not responding." Get ortho and general surgery down here now, Dr. Martinez commanded. He looked at me. Marcus, you're on airway. Keep her breathing. This was where I lived. In the heart of the storm. My mind went quiet. All the family drama, all the noise, faded away. There was only the patient, the monitors, and the task at hand. For the next 20 minutes, I was a part of a machine dedicated to one single purpose. Cheating death. I managed her ventilation, called out vitals, anticipated the surgeon's needs before they even asked. It was a complex, high-stakes ballet, and I knew every step. We stabilized her. We got her to the OR. She would live. Later, as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion, Dr. Martinez found me in the break room. I was staring into a cup of black coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. Good work in there today, Chen, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You're a rock. You know that, right? Just doing my job, Doc. I mumbled. Yeah, well, you do it better than most, he said. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down opposite me. Speaking of pressure, I had a board meeting this morning that was almost as stressful as that trauma. I gave a weak smile. Oh yeah. Had to listen to our big shot developer board member, Peterson, complain for an hour. Dr. Martinez rolled his eyes. The guy's a shark, thinks money can fix anything. He's been trying to build this massive, high-end wellness retreat out in the Hamptons. He's called it his legacy project. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He told us his company has spent 2 years buying up an entire block of waterfront property. The doctor continued, shaking his head. They've acquired every single parcel except one. One little house right in the middle of the whole damn thing. The owner refused to sell to a corporation. Now the entire multi-million-dollar development is stalled because of this one property. Peterson's going crazy trying to find out who the new anonymous owner is so he can throw money at them. I kept my face a perfect mask of disinterest, but inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs. It was a confirmation beyond my wildest dreams. I hadn't just bought a house. I had bought a linchpin, a key, the one piece of leverage that could bring a corporate shark like Peterson to the table. My little boring brick fortress was sitting on a strategic gold mine. The rest of the day, I walked around in a daze. The scale of what I had done was starting to dawn on me. This was no longer just about embarrassing Alex. This had escalated into something much, much bigger. That evening, I met Wei for ramen. He was the only one I could talk to. I laid out the whole story for him, the secret mentorship with Brian, the long game, the house, and now the developer. He listened, his eyes getting wider with every detail. When I finished, he put down his chopsticks and just stared at me. Marcus, he said, his voice full of awe. You haven't just been playing chess. You've been playing three-dimensional chess, on a board no one else even knew existed. He shook his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. This is beautiful. This is a work of art. As if on cue, my phone rang. The screen glowed with my mother's name. I silenced it. A text immediately followed. Marcus, I'm not asking, I'm telling. You will be at Alex's house on Friday night. He is making the most important announcement of his career, and this family will show a united front. Your father is expecting you. Do not disappoint him again. The tone had shifted from cloying guilt to direct command. They were panicking. They needed this win for Alex, and my presence as the dutifully supportive younger brother was a required part of the scenery. I showed the text to Wei. He read it and laughed. The most important announcement of his career. Huh? The delusion is breathtaking. He looked at me. So, you're going? Wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. Friday night arrived, cloaked in a humidity that promised a storm. I drove my Honda to Alex's palace of debt. The house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, every window blazing with light, a desperate attempt to project success and happiness into the night. Wei met me in the driveway, a sly grin on his face. The caterers from Le Fleur just left, he whispered. He's telling everyone inside that he spent the whole day cooking. Mom's in the kitchen right now, frantically transferring cocoa vin from foil trays to her own Le Creuset pots. The sheer absurdity of it all was staggering. The entire foundation of their lives was a lie, right down to the food on their plates. Inside was a carefully curated crowd of Alex's friends and a few family members. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. I saw Alex holding court, a champagne flute in his hand, laughing too loudly. He was playing the part of the conquering hero. Dinner was an agonizing performance. Alex dominated the conversation, dropping hints about his Hamptons empire and his vision for the future. My father watched him with the rapt attention of a true believer. Finally, the moment arrived. Alex stood, tapping his glass. He launched into a rambling speech about legacy, hard work, and the Chun family name. And so, after months of grueling negotiations and strategic maneuvering, I am ecstatic to officially announce that I have secured the Abernathy estate in the Hamptons, he declared, his chest puffed out. He paused, a broad, triumphant smile on his face, waiting for the room to erupt in applause. The eruption never came. Brian, seated next to him, had been quietly scrolling through his phone. He looked up, his brow furrowed in polite confusion. His timing was impeccable. "Honey, that's odd," Brian said, his voice just loud enough to cut through the expectant silence. "The public listing for the Abernathy estate says it was sold 4 days ago." He turned his phone so a few people nearby could see the screen with the big red sold banner. "It says it was purchased by an anonymous LLC. Did you use a shell company? I don't remember us setting one up." The silence that followed was profound. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and smugness out of the room. Alex's triumphant smile froze, then crumbled. His face cycled through a Rolodex of emotions. Confusion, then denial, then pure, undiluted panic. "What? No, that can't be right," he stammered, fumbling for his own phone. "My agent would have told me. It must be a mistake on the website." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I could feel the tectonic plates of my family's world beginning to shift beneath my feet. The storm I had so carefully seeded was about to break, and it was going to be glorious. The immediate aftermath of Brian's perfectly timed grenade was a spectacle of controlled chaos. While Alex frantically jabbed at his phone screen, his face growing paler by the second, my mother swooped in, a whirlwind of social graces and denial. "Oh, you know how these real estate websites are," she chirped, her laugh a little too high-pitched. "They're never up to date. Alex, honey, why don't you tell everyone about the new landscaping you're planning?" My father glared at Brian. "An inappropriate time to be checking your phone. Wouldn't you say, Brian?" he said, his voice low and menacing. He wasn't angry at the potential problem. He was angry that the flawless presentation of their success had been disrupted. Alex wasn't listening. "I'm calling my agent," he hissed, stalking out of the room towards his home office. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this nonsense." The guests, sensing a fissure in the family's perfect facade, began to exchange uneasy glances. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. Conversations started up again, but they were strained and quiet. Everyone was trying very hard to pretend they hadn't just witnessed the guest of honor's spectacular implosion. I needed a moment. The victory was sweet, but the pressure in the room was suffocating. "Excuse me," I murmured to my aunt. "Just going to use the restroom." I escaped down a hallway lined with professionally framed photos of Alex. Alex shaking hands with some local celebrity, Alex cutting a ribbon at a charity event, Alex standing in front of a series of increasingly expensive cars. It was a shrine to a man in love with his own image. The guest bathroom was an exercise in over-the-top luxury. Gold-plated taps, a sink carved from a single piece of marble, towels that were probably too expensive to actually use. I shut the heavy door, and the silence was a relief. I leaned my back against the cool wood, my heart thudding a steady rhythm against my ribs. From down the hall, I could hear the faint, frantic cadence of Alex's voice from his office. He was clearly on the phone with his agent, his words sharp and panicked. And in that sterile, silent room, A crack appeared in my own resolve. I thought about what I was about to do. This wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just about taking a house. It was about systematically dismantling my brother's entire identity, piece by piece, in front of everyone he cared about. My mind flashed to an image from when we were kids. Alex was 12 and I was 8. He had accidentally broken our father's favorite model ship, a complex, beautiful schooner he'd spent a year building. I saw the look of pure terror on Alex's face. I knew my father's temper, so when Dad came in and demanded to know who did it, I lied. I said it was me. I took the punishment. A week of being grounded and a lecture that felt like it lasted for hours, because I couldn't bear to see my brother look that broken. Where did that person go? When did the desire to protect him curdle into this cold, calculated need to destroy him? I looked at my reflection in the vast, gold-framed mirror. My face was calm, my eyes steady, but behind them, a war was raging. Was this really going to fix anything? Would humiliating Alex in front of his friends and our parents finally earn me the respect I craved? Or would it just prove that I was just as cruel as they were? Maybe the better victory was the quiet one. Let the house remain a mystery. Let them all wonder. I would know the truth. Brian would know. That could be enough. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the marble countertop where I'd placed it. I glanced down. A text message. My blood ran cold when I saw the sender. Nai. My grandmother was a woman of few words, but every one of them carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. I opened the message, my hands suddenly unsteady. A tree with rotten roots cannot be pruned. It must be uprooted so a new one can grow in healthy soil. Do not flinch from the work of the axe. Sometimes you have to tear it all down to build something real. I read the message once, then twice. The work of the axe. She wasn't just giving me permission. She was giving me a directive. She, who had watched this slow poison seep into our family for decades, was telling me that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about demolition. It was about clearing the land. It was about the faint, terrifying hope that something new, something real, could be planted in its place. I stared at my reflection again. The doubt was gone. The conflict had vanished. In its place was a singular, cold purpose. Nai was right. I wasn't the villain of this story. I was the axe. I took a deep breath, the sterile air of the bathroom feeling clean and sharp. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my shirt, and opened the door. It was time to get to work. When I stepped back into the living room, Alex had returned from his office. The change in him was stark. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, ashen-faced shock. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His agent had obviously confirmed the terrible truth. The house was gone. He was standing in the middle of the room, looking lost. The remaining guests were starting to make their excuses, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. "Well, Richard, Linda, it's getting late," Uncle James said, standing up. "Wonderful dinner." It was a transparent lie, but everyone was grateful for it. "No, wait," Alex said, his voice thin and reedy. "Everyone, wait." He seemed to be searching for words, for some way to spin this, to salvage the evening and his reputation. This was my moment. The stage was set, the audience was captive, and the axe was sharpened. I walked toward the center of the room, and the simple act of my movement drew every eye. "Maybe," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the awkward silence, "I can shed some light on the situation." Alex shot me a look of pure venom. "What could you possibly know about this, Marcus?" He sneered, a pathetic echo of his earlier arrogance. "This is a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. It's a little more complicated than taking someone's temperature." I ignored him. I didn't look at him. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. Then I let my gaze sweep across the remaining family members. I wanted them all to see this. I took out my phone. I didn't say a word. I simply unlocked it, opened a specific PDF file, and held it up for a moment before placing it, screen up, on the large glass coffee table. It was the final closing document for the sale of the Abernathy estate. Then, with a deliberate movement of my index finger, I slid the phone across the smooth glass surface. It glided silently across the table, a sleek black messenger of doom, coming to a halt directly in front of my brother. The room held its breath. Alex stared down at the phone as if it were a bomb. His eyes darted across the screen. I watched his face closely. I saw the flicker of confusion as he scanned the legal jargon. I saw the dawning horror as he registered the name of the shell company I'd created, Boring Brick Fortress, LLC. And then, I saw the exact moment his eyes landed on the final line of the document, the one that listed the sole managing member of the LLC, Marcus Chun. He made a noise, a horrible, strangled sound that was half gasp, half sob. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a wild, uncomprehending terror. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. "No," he whispered, shaking his head back and forth. "No, no, no." He snatched the phone from the table, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. "This is a fake. It has to be a fake. You photoshopped this. You can't. You're a nurse." He spat the word out like it was a curse. "You don't have this kind of money. You can't." His voice had risen to a shrill, desperate shriek. The last vestiges of his composure had crumbled to dust. "It's amazing what you can accumulate when your financial plan isn't based on leasing a new BMW every 2 years," I said, my voice cutting and cold. "It's a concept called saving and investing, not just gambling on condos you hope to flip. It's the boring, brick-by-brick work you never had the patience for." "What is the meaning of this?" my father thundered, finally finding his voice. He took a step toward me, his face purple with rage. "What kind of sick, twisted game are you playing?" "This isn't a game, Dad," I said, turning to face him directly, my own anger finally rising to the surface. "This is a lesson. You wanted Alex to be a success. You measured that success in dollars and flashy toys. You never once stopped to measure it in character or honesty or integrity. I just decided to play by the rules you created. That's when Alex did the one thing that sealed his fate. Cornered, humiliated, and exposed, he did what all bullies do. He deflected. He turned on the closest, safest target. He turned on his own husband. "This is your fault," he screamed, jabbing a finger at Brian. You're the financial wizard. You're the one who handles the accounts. You were supposed to be watching things. How did you let him do this? What kind of husband are you?" It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He had publicly attacked the one person in the room who knew the real, ugly truth. Brian had been standing silently by the fireplace, an observer to the carnage. Now he pushed himself off the mantelpiece. The quiet, accommodating man everyone knew was gone. In his place stood a man made of ice and steel. "You're right, Alex," Brian said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. "I am a financial analyst, and I do handle the accounts." He walked toward the center of the room, stopping beside me. He and I were a united front. "And my accounts are in perfect order," he said. "My portfolio is balanced, my retirement fund is healthy, and my credit score is 812. The problem, Alex, isn't with my accounts. The problem is with yours." Brian's gaze swept the room, ensuring he had everyone's full attention. "Alex projects an image of wealth. It's a beautiful image. It's also a complete fabrication. Brian, don't you dare?" Alex whispered, his face ashen. "No, I think I will," Brian said, his voice hardening. "I think it's time the family understood the truth they've been financing. Alex has over $200,000 in high-interest credit card debt. His investment properties are so heavily mortgaged that he's underwater on every single one. That car he mocked Marcus for is a lease, and he's 3 months behind on the payments. He's been juggling debt, taking out new loans to pay off old ones, for years." Each word was a precise, devastating blow. My mother let out a small, wounded cry. My father looked as if he'd been physically struck. "But that's not the worst of it," Brian said, his voice dropping, forcing them to listen even more closely. He turned his head and looked Alex dead in the eye. The down payment he needed for the Hamptons house. The deposit he had to make to even be considered a serious buyer. He didn't have it. So he went to the bank and took out a high-risk signature loan. Brian paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. He got that loan by forging my signature on the application. The final word landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. Forgery. Felony. This was no longer just about debt or lies. This was about a crime. Alex stared at Brian, his mouth agape, a fish drowning in air. The magnificent golden statue of Alex Chen. The successful son, the real estate mogul, the man who had everything, had finally, irrevocably, crumbled into dust. The week following the dinner party felt like living in the eerie quiet after a hurricane has passed. The winds of drama had died down, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage. There were hushed phone calls, tearful accusations, and a general atmosphere of bewildered panic. The family's immediate, instinctual response was not introspection, but damage control. How could they hide the forgery? How could they pay off the debts? How could they rebuild the fallen statue of Alex? The answer, as always, was money. My parents' money. It came to a head the following Saturday. They summoned me to the house for an emergency family meeting. The air in the formal living room was thick with unspoken grief and resentment. It was just the five of us. My parents, a shell-shocked Alex, a grimly silent Brian, and me. Alex was huddled on one end of the sofa, looking small and broken. He had aged 10 years in 7 days. My father stood before the fireplace, assuming the role of patriarch, a king presiding over a ruined kingdom. "We've spent the week with our lawyers and our bankers," he began, his voice heavy and formal. "It's a mess, a terrible mess." He looked at Alex with a pained expression that was a mixture of anger and pity. "But he is our son." He clasped his hands behind his back. "We have a solution. We can take out a substantial second mortgage on this house. It will be enough to clear Alex's immediate high-interest debts and, more importantly, to make a quiet settlement with the bank regarding the signature issue. We can make this go away." I stared at him. He was willing to leverage his entire retirement, the very symbol of his life's work, not to force his son to confront his demons, but to buy him an escape hatch. It was the same pattern repeated on a grander scale. Alex breaks something, they pay to fix it. No lesson learned, no consequence faced. He was under enormous pressure to succeed. My mother added, her voice trembling as she rushed to defend her broken son. "The pressure we put on him. He made a terrible mistake, but he deserves a second chance." "He's had 100 second chances," Brian said from his armchair, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And he's squandered every one of them." Alex flinched but said nothing. He was waiting for the bailout just as he always had. Before I could unleash the torrent of angry words building in my chest, another voice, quiet yet absolute, cut through the tension. "Enough!" It was Nai. She had entered the room so quietly none of us had noticed. She stood by the doorway, her small frame radiating an authority that no one in the room dared to challenge. She walked slowly to her favorite armchair, sat down, and fixed her sharp, intelligent eyes on my parents. "For 40 years, she said, her voice clear and steady, "I have watched this sickness grow. I have watched you nurture it." She looked at my father. "Richard, do you remember when Alex was 16 and he crashed your new Mercedes? You were furious, but the next week you bought him another one. Do you remember when Marcus was 15 and got a B+ in your old subject, calculus, and you grounded him for a month for not being perfect? You were not raising two sons. You were building one idol, and you were chipping away at the other." She turned to my mother. "Linda, you smothered him with praise he didn't earn and excuses he didn't deserve. You taught him that the world would always clean up his messes. You have loved him, yes, but you have not prepared him for reality. You have crippled him with your kindness." My parents sat in stunned silence, unable to refute the truth of her words. "This," Nai said, gesturing around the opulent room, "is a prison built of pride and expectation. Taking out another mortgage is not an act of love. It is just another gilded bar for the cage. You must stop building. It is time to tear it down. Her speech hung in the air, a final, unassailable judgment, and it created the perfect opening for me. I stood up. Nai is right, I said. You can't fix this with money. I let that sink in before delivering the pivot. But, ironically, a different kind of money is the only language you'll understand right now. It's the only tool that can force a real change. I took out my phone. I had a very interesting meeting this week with Mr. Peterson, the resort developer. He was, to put it mildly, very eager to speak with the anonymous owner of the Abernathy estate. I looked from my father's shocked face to my mother's confused one. He doesn't just want to buy the house. That was his small-minded plan. After talking to me, to a nurse who understands the concept of wellness, and to his architects, he has a new vision. A long-term partnership. A joint venture to develop the most exclusive wellness retreat on the East Coast. My property isn't a house. It's the controlling share in a massive new enterprise. I let them process the scale of it. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a businessman, a strategist, a kingmaker. This deal, if structured correctly, will generate millions in revenue for decades to come, I said calmly. I hold all the cards. I can sign the deal myself and walk away with everything, and you will never hear from me again. I will be free, and Alex will face the consequences of his actions alone. I paused, letting the threat land with its full weight. Or, I said, my voice softening slightly, we can do what Nai suggested. We can tear down the old foundation and use these new, unexpected resources to build something real. A new family structure, a trust. But this time it will be built on my terms. On terms of accountability, transparency, and earned respect. The choice was theirs. They could cling to the ruins of their ruined kingdom, or they could accept citizenship in a new world, a world where I, the forgotten son, was now the architect. The year that followed was the longest, hardest year of our lives. Building something real, it turns out, is infinitely more difficult than tearing something down. It's a slow, messy, and painful process. The Chun Family Trust was established, not as a source of handouts, but as a rigid structure of accountability. I, as the managing trustee, worked with Brian and a team of lawyers to draft the bylaws. They were ruthless. The assets, the house, and the lucrative partnership with Peterson's company were locked down. Profits were to be reinvested, with dividends distributed based on a strict set of performance metrics. It was a business, not a family piggy bank. Alex's second chance came in the form of a binding contract we called the Accountability Protocol. He hated it. The terms were humbling. First, the material possessions had to go. The leased car was returned. The McMansion, already in foreclosure, was surrendered to the bank. He had to sell his collection of designer watches to pay off a fraction of one of his credit cards. He moved into a small, one-bedroom rental apartment in a nondescript part of town. Second, he had to get a real, verifiable job. Not a flashy sales gig, but a 9-to-5 with a W-2. After dozens of rejections, he landed a position as a junior logistics coordinator for a shipping company. It was data entry, tracking shipments, and dealing with angry truckers. He came home exhausted and smelling of diesel fumes. It was the first honest work he had done in his adult life. Third, the therapies were mandatory. Twice a week with a financial counselor who ripped apart his spending habits. Once a week with a therapist. I got the anonymized reports. For the first 3 months, he was hostile and defiant. Then, something shifted. He had a breakthrough. The report noted he spent an entire session talking about his paralyzing fear of disappointing our father. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the first crack of light in a very dark room. The marriage of Alex and Brian was its own delicate reconstruction project. Brian moved into the apartment with Alex, but he took the tiny second bedroom. They were roommates, not husbands. The trust paid for their counseling sessions. Their therapist described their progress as fragile but hopeful. The most powerful moment of that year happened about 6 months in. Brian called a meeting. Just him, Alex, and me, at the same sterile coffee shop where he had first begun my financial education. He placed the thick manila envelope, the one with the evidence of Alex's forgery, on the table between us. The DA's statute of limitations on this is 3 years, Brian said, his voice neutral. We have about 2.5 years left. Alex flinched, staring at the envelope as if it were radioactive. I've thought about this every day for 6 months, Brian said. I've thought about justice. I've thought about revenge. I've thought about what you deserve. He looked at Alex, and his eyes were full of a deep, weary sadness. And I've realized what I want isn't punishment. What I want is a husband I can trust. He pushed the envelope toward Alex. So I'm not going to destroy this, and I'm not going to hide it. It's going to stay right here in this envelope. And this envelope is going to stay in my desk drawer. It's a reminder, not a threat. It's a reminder of what happens when trust is broken, and a reminder of the hard work it will take to rebuild it. I need to know the man I'm sleeping next to is the man who sees this every morning and chooses to be better. Alex just nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He didn't speak. For the first time, he seemed to understand that grace wasn't the erasure of a mistake, but the opportunity to live with its consequences and still be loved. My parents' journey was perhaps the most difficult. They began family therapy, which at first was a disaster. My father tried to debate the therapist on psychological theories. My mother cried and defended her actions. But Nai attended every single session with them. She sat there, a silent, unmovable testament to the truth, and her presence prevented them from running away. The breakthrough came in a session about expectations. My father, his voice thick with emotion, finally admitted it. I looked at Alex and I saw a chance to have the life I wanted, the flash, the easy success. I pushed him toward it. I looked at Marcus, he said, not looking at me. And I saw the life I actually had, the long hours, the stress, the grind. It scared me. I didn't want him to struggle like I did. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the truth. It was a foundation, something real we could possibly build on. Throughout it all, I worked. I ran the trust with a ruthless efficiency. I negotiated with Peterson's team. I learned about zoning variances and environmental impact reports. I was a damn good trustee. I was also still a damn good nurse. My 2 worlds, which had once been secret, were now integrated. My life was finally whole. It was a year of hard labor, the emotional equivalent of renovating a house that had been left to rot for decades. We had to tear out the moldy drywall, fix the faulty wiring, and completely rebuild the foundation, one painful, boring brick at a time. Our first annual board meeting for the Chen Family Trust was held a year to the day after the disastrous dinner party. The setting was symbolic. We were in the great room of the Hamptons house, sitting around a large, solid oak table I had bought. The room was filled with sunlight streaming in from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Atlantic. There was no gaudy art on the walls, just a few beautiful landscape photographs and one framed picture on the mantelpiece. A candid shot of Nai, laughing on the beach. The atmosphere was professional, not celebratory. I was at the head of the table, a laptop in front of me, presenting a slide deck on the trust's performance and the Phase 2 development plans for the wellness retreat. My tone was crisp, my data was clear. My mother sat to my left, a legal pad in front of her. As the trust's secretary, she was taking the official minutes, her notes meticulous and organized. She had discovered a latent talent for administration, a purpose that had nothing to do with her son's achievements. Across from her sat Alex. He was thinner, and the expensive haircut was gone, but his eyes were clear. He was no longer a voting member. His protocol required a 2-year probation period, but he was there as a consultant. During my presentation on logistical challenges for construction material delivery, he spoke up. If we reroute the supply trucks through the North Access Road during off-peak hours, he said, pointing to a map on the screen, we can cut delivery times by 15% and avoid violating local noise ordinances. It was a brilliant, practical suggestion. It was the insight of a logistics coordinator, not a flashy salesman. I nodded, genuinely impressed. Good point, Alex. Let's model that out. For a second, our eyes met, and there was a flicker of mutual professional respect. Brian, sitting beside him, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. They had a long way to go, but they were facing in the same direction. My father sat at the far end of the table. He was the quietest he had ever been in a meeting. He didn't interrupt, he didn't pontificate. He just listened. He watched me command the room, not with bluster and volume like Alex used to, but with quiet competence and hard data. After I adjourned the meeting, people began to mingle, grabbing coffee and talking. My father walked over to me as I was closing my laptop. I braced myself, expecting a critique, a suggestion, and "I would have done it this way" comment. He had a lifetime of them stored up. He stood beside me for a moment, just looking out the window at the ocean. The silence stretched. Then he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "How was your shift yesterday, son?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question hit me with the force of a physical impact. It was so simple, so normal, and yet, it was a question he had never asked me in my entire life. Not with real interest, not with the simple desire to know about my day. He had asked about my grades, my career choices, my financial status. He had never just asked about me. All the years of anger, of resentment, of feeling invisible, seemed to rush out of me in a single silent exhale. The fortress I had built around my heart, the one made of anger and investment accounts, suddenly felt unnecessary. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face, unforced and light. "It was tough," I said, my voice a little thick. 12 hours. A bad car accident. But we saved a good one. A young woman, just starting her life. My father put his hand on my shoulder. It wasn't the condescending, overly firm clap of my brother. It was just a hand. A father's hand. "That's my son," he said. His voice full of a quiet pride I had never heard before. "The one who saves people." That was it. That was the victory. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It wasn't Alex's downfall. It was this one moment, this one simple, honest question. The feeling of being seen, finally, for exactly who I was. We stood there for a moment, father and son, looking out at the endless ocean, the quiet roar of the waves a promise of a new, and very real, dawn. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely unseen by the people who were supposed to see you best? Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.